Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in containment block Gamma tasted of ozone and recycled despair. Kale knew the flavor well. It was the residue of absolute control, the sterile exhalation of a system that had perfected the art of rendering life into data. For 312 rotations, he had walked these polished chrome floors, his boots echoing a lonely rhythm in the cathedral-like silence. His job, as defined by the Directorate, was that of a glorified warden, a technical custodian for assets too volatile for automated systems alone. Here, on the barren crust of Hyperion's sixth moon, Outpost 7 was the final destination for things the Directorate wished to understand, weaponize, or forget. Kale was a veteran of the Outer Rim Purge, a conflict that had scoured three-star systems and left him with a network of faint scars on his skin and a deep, abiding weariness in his soul. He had followed orders, fought for a cause he was told was just, and watched men burn in the cold vacuum for the sake of secure trade routes and corporate sovereignty. Now, he babysat a ghost in a cage, a far less noble but infinitely quieter form of service. The Directorate paid well for quiet compliance, and Kale had long since exhausted his capacity for anything else. Survival was his only remaining ideology. The asset in Gamma Block was designated Subject 0. It had been pulled from the ruins of a forgotten world deep in the Veiled Nebula, a place Directorate survey teams had marked for resource exploitation. They had found it in a subterranean chamber of singing crystal, dormant and alone. They brought it here in a quantum stasis field, a prize of immense potential and equal danger. The scientists had produced reams of data, endless spectrographic analyses and biosignature readouts, but they understood nothing. They described it as a biological singularity, a being of fluid, mutable form that defied known physics. To the guards, the grunts like Kale, it was simply the witch. He stood before the containment cell now. It was not a cage of bars and steel, but a perfect sphere of shimmering energy suspended in the center of the vast, circular chamber. Within the sphere, the entity drifted. Today, it resembled a woman, a figure woven from shadow and starlight, her form indistinct, her features veiled in the soft, internal luminescence of her own body. Long, filament-like tendrils, like hair made of nebulae, flowed around her, brushing against the inner wall of the energy field with a silence that felt louder than any sound. She never slept, never ate, never spoke. She simply existed, an enigma wrapped in a power the Directorate was desperate to unlock. Kale's task for this shift was the same as the last 50 shifts, to run the cognitive response diagnostic. It was a futile exercise. He would issue a series of simple commands through the cell's integrated vocalizer, and the system would measure any corresponding neurological flicker from the subject. The results were always the same. Nothing. A flat line of elegant, silent refusal. He keyed his authorization code into the console beside the thick plasteel window. The console hummed to life, its screen bathing his tired face in a cold blue light. Initiating Diagnostic Protocol 7 Delta. He spoke, his voice flat and devoid of inflection, a perfect match for the automated voice that confirmed his command. On the screen, a list of prompts appeared. Subject 0. Kale began, his voice amplified into the containment sphere. Acknowledge vocal command. Manifest a solid, geometric shape. A cube. Inside the sphere, the star-dusted woman did not move. Her form remained fluid, ethereal. The diagnostic sensors registered no change. Kale logged the result. Failure. He moved to the next command. Subject 0. Shift your core energy signature to the red spectrum. The being's internal light remained a cool, silver blue. Failure. Subject 0. Generate a low-frequency auditory signal. Silence. Failure. He went through the list, his voice a monotonous drone. Each command was met with the same profound stillness, the same absolute lack of compliance. It was a contest of wills across an impossible divide, and she always won by simply refusing to play. The scientists theorized she was non-sentient, a mere biological curiosity. Kale knew better. He had seen the way she sometimes tracked his movement when he thought she wasn't aware, a subtle shift in the star patterns of her eyes. There was a mind in there, ancient and vast, and it held them all in contempt. He reached the final command on the list, the one they always ended with. Subject 0. Cease all internal biological motion for a period of 5 seconds. Comply. It was a test of absolute control, a demand for her to feign death. And like every time before, she ignored it. The tendrils of light around her head continued their slow, graceful dance. The diagnostic returned its final, predictable result. Failure. Cale sighed, the sound barely audible in the sterile chamber. He was tired. Tired of the moon, the recycled air, the pointless tests. Tired of being a cog in a machine he no longer believed in. He looked at the ethereal figure in the sphere, this silent prisoner, and a flicker of something. Not pity, not empathy, but a shared sense of profound imprisonment stirred within him. He had his orders. Log the failure and end the diagnostic. But a strange impulse, born of sheer, soul-crushing monotony, took hold. He leaned closer to the console's microphone, breaking protocol for the first time in his 5 years of service at the outpost. He did not issue a command. He made a request. His voice was softer now, stripped of the official cadence. Please, he said. Just one. Just show them something. Anything. Please. For a moment, there was only the familiar, humming silence. He expected nothing. He had wasted his breath. He was about to turn away, to log the final failure and retreat to the sterile anonymity of his quarters. Then it happened. The diagnostic console screamed, a high-pitched wail of sudden, overwhelming data. Red lights flashed across the panel, alarms he had never seen before. Inside the sphere, the woman of starlight changed. Her form solidified, coalescing with impossible speed. The fluid shadows and light hardened into a physical body, pale and definite. The tendrils of her hair snapped into place, framing a face of breathtaking, alien beauty. Her eyes, which had been nebulous swirls of silver, focused. They were now the color of a dying star, ancient and intelligent, and they were fixed directly on him. A new voice filled the chamber. It did not come from the vocalizer, but from inside his own mind, a sound like shattering crystal and whispered secrets. It was clear, resonant, and utterly calm. You, the voice said, speaking a language he had never heard but understood perfectly, are my owner. And then, the energy sphere flickered, destabilized, and collapsed in on itself with a deafening implosion of sound and light that threw Cale back against the far wall. The alarms of Outpost 7 began to shriek, a frantic chorus announcing a containment breach of the highest order. The ghost was out of its cage. The world erupted into a cacophony of sirens and automated warnings. Containment failure in Block Gamma. All security units converge. Lethal force authorized. The dispassionate female voice of the station's central AI was a stark counterpoint to the raw panic that began to bleed through the comms. Cale pushed himself up, his ears ringing. The plasteel observation window was a spiderweb of cracks. In the center of the chamber, where the sphere had been, she stood. Anya. The name bloomed in his mind. Unbidden, a gift from her. She was solid now, wearing the same simple gray tunic as the station's low-level personnel, a form she had seemingly woven from the ambient energy. She looked at him, not with malice, but with a calm, unnerving focus. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. The inner blast door to the observation room hissed open, and a squad of Directorate security troopers stormed in, their pulse rifles leveled. At their lead was Commander Valerius, his face a mask of furious determination. Valerius was a product of the Directorate's officer academies, a man who saw the universe in terms of assets and threats, compliance and termination. He and Cale had a history of quiet animosity, the veteran's weary cynicism clashing with the officer's zealous belief in the system. Custodian. Valerius barked, his eyes fixed on Cale. What did you do? I ran the diagnostic, Cale said, his voice hoarse. It was the truth, if not the whole truth. She has never responded before. Valerius snarled, gesturing with his rifle towards the breached chamber. You are relieved of duty. You are under arrest. He turned his attention to Anya, his expression hardening into one of absolute resolve. Subject 0. Assume a passive stance. Return to containment protocols. Anya did not look at Valerius. Her gaze remained on Cale. The voice echoed in his head again, a private channel in the midst of the chaos. They will unmake me. Then they will unmake you. We must leave. Cale's mind raced. He was a traitor. Aiding the asset was a death sentence. But standing here meant being executed by Valerius for a crime he didn't fully understand, only to have the commander and his men be obliterated by a being they couldn't possibly comprehend. Survival. It was his only ideology, and right now, survival meant moving. Troopers, open fire. Subdue the asset, Valerius commanded, his patience exhausted. The air crackled as the pulse rifles charged. Cale made his choice. He lunged for the emergency lockdown panel on the wall, the one that controlled the blast door Valerius had just entered through. He slammed his palm onto the glowing red button. Go, he yelled, not to the troopers, but to her. The heavy door began to slide shut. Valerius, realizing the betrayal, roared in frustration. Traitor! Kill him! The first pulse bolt seared the air past Cale's ear, striking the wall behind him in a shower of molten metal. Before the others could fire, Anya moved. She didn't run or leap. She simply flowed. One moment she was in the center of the room. The next she was beside him, her hand raised. A shimmering wall of translucent blue energy erupted from her palm, absorbing the incoming volley of pulse fire like a sponge soaking up water. The bolts vanished with a soft hiss. The troopers stared, their training utterly unprepared for such a sight. Valerius screamed orders, but his voice was drowned out by the clang of the blast door sealing them in. They were trapped, Cale and Anya, alone with a squad of heavily armed soldiers. This way, Anya's mental voice urged, and she turned towards a maintenance hatch in the floor Cale had never paid much attention to. She placed her hand on the heavy durasteel lock. It glowed white-hot, the metal melting like wax under her touch. With a groaning screech, the hatch tore free from its moorings. Cale didn't hesitate. He dropped into the dark, narrow tunnel below, landing hard on a mesh catwalk. Anya followed, as silent as a falling shadow. Above them, the troopers began firing at the hole in the floor, but they were already moving, plunging into the labyrinthine service corridors that formed the station's forgotten underbelly. The shouts of Valerius and the renewed shriek of alarms faded behind them, replaced by the drip of unseen fluids and the hum of the station's life support. The initial dynamic was one of pure, adrenaline-fueled necessity. He knew the layout of the upper levels, the official pathways. But down here, in the guts of the station, he was as lost as she was. The air was thick with the smell of lubricant and ionized dust. Pipes, thick as a man's torso, snaked along the walls, carrying coolant and power to the pristine levels above. Their only light came from the occasional emergency strip, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like living things. Anya moved with an unnatural grace, her bare feet making no sound on the grated metal. She seemed to sense the path ahead, navigating the maze of junctions and crawl spaces with an instinct that defied logic. Cale followed, his heart pounding, his service pistol feeling like a child's toy in his hand. He was a fugitive, allied with a creature of immense power who had just named him her owner. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it had marked him for death. They stopped in a small, circular junction where 3 tunnels converged. Cale leaned against a cold metal wall, trying to catch his breath. Anya stood in the center of the junction, her head tilted as if listening to a sound he couldn't hear. They are coming, she projected into his mind. They are cutting off the primary access points to the shuttle bay. How do you know? Cale asked, speaking aloud. His own voice sounded rough and alien in the oppressive quiet. I feel the machine, she replied. The flow of its energy. They direct it. They are clumsy. Predictable. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time without the filter of a plasteel window or the pressure of immediate combat. Her skin had a faint, pearlescent quality, and her eyes, those dying stars, seemed to hold a galaxy of sorrow. She was not a monster. She was something else entirely. Powerful, yes, but also lost. Vulnerable. Her power was a shield, but he had the distinct feeling she didn't know how to wield it as a weapon. It was instinctual, defensive. A low grinding sound echoed from the tunnel to their left. A remote-controlled security drone, a spider-like machine with a mounted pulse cannon, crawled into view, its red optical sensors sweeping the darkness. Get down, Cale hissed, pushing her behind a thick bundle of power conduits. The drone paused, its sensors zeroing in on their position. Unauthorized life forms detected. Its metallic voice chirped. Cease movement and prepare for detainment. Before Kale could raise his pistol, the drone's cannon swiveled and fired. He braced for the impact, for the searing heat of a pulse bolt. But it never came. He opened his eyes to see Anya standing in front of him, her arm outstretched. The bolt was frozen in midair, a needle of pure energy held suspended a few inches from her palm, quivering like a captured insect. She turned her head slightly, looking at the captured bolt with a kind of detached curiosity. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she sent it flying back the way it came. The bolt struck the drone dead center, and the machine exploded in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. The tunnel was plunged back into near darkness, the silence now broken by the crackle of fried circuitry. She had saved him. The realization struck Kale with surprising force. It was a simple, transactional act of mutual protection, but it felt like more. It was the first concrete brick laid in the foundation of a trust he hadn't even realized they were building. He looked at her, and she met his gaze. In her mind, he felt not pride or aggression, but a simple, profound statement. You protected me. I protect you. He nodded, a gesture she seemed to understand. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's keep moving. The shuttle bay is out. There's a secondary cargo airlock on the sublevels. It's used for waste disposal. It's our only shot. He took the lead this time, his knowledge of the station's schematics, buried under years of routine, slowly resurfacing. He was no longer just running. He was planning, thinking, fighting back. The weariness that had defined his existence for years was burning away, replaced by the sharp, clean focus of a soldier with a mission. His mission was survival. But for the first time in a long time, it was not just his own. They journeyed deeper into the station's forgotten anatomy, a world away from the polished chrome and regulated atmosphere of the upper decks. Here, the station showed its age. Metal was rusted, pipes leaked a viscous, iridescent fluid, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. They waded through knee-deep maintenance coolant in flooded corridors and crawled through ventilation shafts so tight Kale could feel the metal scraping against his back. This shared ordeal became their language, a steadying hand from him as they navigated a precarious ledge over a chasm that dropped into the station's fusion core. A soft, mental nudge from her, warning him of a weakened floor panel or a hidden security sensor. They moved in near-perfect sync, a silent partnership forged in the darkness and pressure. He learned to read the subtle shifts in her luminescence, a brighter glow indicating danger, a softer pulse suggesting a clear path. She, in turn, began to understand his physical limitations, waiting for him without prompting, her patience seemingly infinite. They found a brief respite in a derelict storage room, filled with obsolete equipment covered in thick sheets of dust. Kale checked the charge on his pistol, less than half. He was low on options, running on fumes and the dregs of his combat training. He sank onto an old crate, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. Anya stood near the center of the room, her form seeming to draw in the sparse light. You are hurt, she stated, the voice in his head gentle. He looked down at his arm. A piece of shrapnel from the exploded drone had torn through his sleeve, leaving a long, ugly gash that was still sluggishly bleeding. He hadn't even noticed. It's nothing, he said, tearing a strip of cloth from his tunic to wrap the wound. She glided over to him, her movements fluid and silent. She knelt before him and reached out, her slender fingers hovering over his arm. He flinched, a reflexive motion born of years of combat and mistrust. She paused, her hand pulling back slightly. In her mind, he felt a wave of hesitation, a question. He forced himself to relax, giving a slow nod. Her fingers, cool and smooth, touched his skin. A soft, blue light emanated from her hand, covering the wound. He felt a strange warmth spread through his arm, a tingling sensation that chased away the pain. When she pulled her hand back, he looked down. The bleeding had stopped. The edges of the cut had sealed, leaving behind only a thin, pink line that looked days old instead of minutes. How? He breathed, stunned. Life is energy, she replied simply. I encouraged the pattern to mend itself. She looked at the fresh scar, then her gaze drifted to the older ones on his forearms, the pale, silvery lines from the purge. You have been broken many times. It wasn't an accusation or a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a profound and ancient sadness. It disarmed him completely. He found himself telling her, not in words, but in a rush of thoughts and memories he didn't try to suppress. He showed her the jungles of Viridia, the flash of plasma fire, the face of a young soldier who had died at his side. He showed her the cold satisfaction of a mission accomplished and the hollow emptiness that followed. He shared the disillusionment, the slow erosion of his faith in the Directorate, the transformation from a proud soldier to a cynical, weary custodian. In return, she showed him flashes of her own history. Not a linear story, but a torrent of sensory impressions. He saw a world of living crystal, singing in harmony with a twin sun. He felt a deep, communal consciousness, a peace so absolute, it was like a physical substance. Then came the shadow. Directorate ships tearing the sky, their mining lasers shattering the crystal spires. He felt her people's confusion, their pain, their terror. He experienced her capture, the brutal shock of being ripped from her world, the cold silence of the stasis field, the endless, meaningless tests in her cell. The Directorate had not discovered a monster. They had committed an atrocity. The Outer Rim purge he had fought in. He saw it now from the other side. It wasn't about securing trade routes. It was about clearing the way, silencing anyone who might object to the Directorate's relentless consumption. It was a war of conquest, and he had been one of its unwitting, bloody tools. The revelation settled in his bones, a cold, heavy truth. Everything he had done, every order he had followed, was built on a foundation of lies. He was not just a custodian. He was a jailer for a victim of his own government. The system he served was not one of order, but of oppression. He looked at his hands, at the scars of a war he had fought for his own oppressors. Then he looked at her. She, too, bore a scar. On her shoulder, a faint, geometric pattern pulsed with a dim, sickly light, a brand. It was the mark of a Directorate asset tag, burned into her very essence when they had first captured her. It was a mark of ownership, a brand of slavery. They were both scarred by the same hand, victims of the same remorseless machine. In that dusty, forgotten room, the gap between them, human and alien, guard and prisoner, vanished. All that remained were two survivors, adrift in a hostile world, united by their shared wounds. A new resolve hardened within Kale. This was no longer just about escape. It was about justice. Their newfound understanding was shattered by the screech of metal from the corridor outside. A cutting torch was slicing through the sealed door. Valerius had found them. "They are here," Kale said, stating the obvious. He grabbed his pistol, the half-charge feeling woefully inadequate. "They'll have the entire corridor covered." Anya looked at the door, then at the opposite wall, a solid sheet of reinforced durasteel. "There is another way," she said. She placed both her palms against the metal wall. It began to glow, the light a fierce, determined white. The metal did not melt this time. It seemed to unweave, the atoms separating with a low, resonant hum. An opening appeared, a perfect circle leading into the darkness of the adjoining sector. Just as the main door burst inward, they slipped through the temporal exit. Kale caught one last glimpse of Commander Valerius's face, contorted with rage and disbelief, before the wall sealed behind them as if it had never been disturbed. They were clear, but Kale knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Valerius was not just a soldier following orders anymore. This was personal. He would not stop. He would hunt them to the edge of the system if he had to. The pursuit was no longer just a matter of protocol. It was a crusade. Valerius was relentless. He seemed to anticipate their every move, cutting off routes Kale thought were secure, flooding entire sectors with neurogas, deploying hunter-killer drones that were faster and more lethal than the standard security models. He was using the full, terrifying weight of the Directorate's military machine against them. Kale realized Valerius wasn't just trying to recapture them. He was trying to prove a point. To prove that the system was absolute, that defiance was futile, that a broken-down veteran and a stray asset could never outrun the reach of his authority. They were cornered in the central engineering nexus, a vast, cavernous space filled with the thrumming heart of the station's fusion reactor. Catwalks crisscrossed the chasm, and the air was hot and thick with the smell of superheated plasma. Below them, The reactor core pulsed with the light of a captive star. Valerius and his elite guard appeared on the catwalks above and below, trapping them in a pincer movement. Kale. Valerius's voice boomed over the station-wide comm, amplified and distorted. Your treason ends now. Surrender the asset, and the administrator may show you mercy. There is no mercy in him, Valerius. Kale shouted back, his voice raw. Only ambition. She's not an asset. She's a living being. It is a thing, a tool. And you are a malfunctioning part that will be replaced. Valerius retorted. Open fire. The Nexus erupted in a storm of pulse fire. Kale and Anya took cover behind a massive coolant pipe as bolts of energy ricocheted around them, filling the air with the shriek of superheated metal. Anya created another of her energy shields, but it flickered under the sustained, concentrated barrage. Kale could feel the strain in her mind, a tremor of exertion. She was powerful, but she was not infinite. I cannot hold it for long. Her thought came to him, strained. Their hate is a focused energy. It is potent. Kale risked a look over the pipe. There were too many of them. They were completely pinned down. Escape was impossible. He looked at the pulsing reactor core below. An idea, desperate and terrible, formed in his mind. He pointed his pistol at the primary energy conduit feeding into the reactor's magnetic containment field. A direct hit would cause a feedback loop, a catastrophic overload. It would destroy the entire station. It was mutually assured destruction. Valerius, Kale yelled, stepping out from behind the pipe and leveling his weapon at the conduit. Back off, or I'll blow the whole moon. Valerius laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You won't, Kale? You're a soldier, not a martyr. You value your own pathetic life too much. That man died in the purge, Kale said, his voice cold and steady. Try me. For a tense moment, there was a standoff. The firing ceased. Valerius stared at Kale, trying to gauge his resolve. Kale held his gaze, his finger tight on the trigger. He was bluffing, but he hoped the commander couldn't see it. He wouldn't kill the hundreds of other personnel on the station, most of whom were just cogs like he had been. It was a standoff Valerius had no intention of honoring. A noble sentiment, the commander's voice echoed, and then a searing pain exploded in Kale's leg. He cried out and collapsed, his pistol clattering away across the catwalk. A sniper, hidden in the superstructure above, had taken him down. Valerius smiled, a predator's grin. As I said, predictable. His men began to advance, their weapons raised. As they closed in, Anya did something she had not done before. The defensive energy around her vanished. She straightened to her full height, and the sorrowful light in her eyes was replaced by a cold, burning fire. The air grew heavy, charged with an immense pressure. A low hum emanated from her, a sound that vibrated in Kale's bones. No, she projected, and the single word was not a plea but a command. A wave of pure kinetic force erupted from her, silent and invisible. It struck Valerius's troopers like a physical blow, sending them flying from the catwalks, their bodies tumbling into the chasm below. Valerius himself was thrown back against a bulkhead with enough force to dent the metal. The catwalk was clear. Anya rushed to Kale's side, her light softening as she knelt beside him. She placed a hand on his wounded leg. The pain receded, but he could feel the bone was shattered. Her healing could only do so much against such a severe injury. We have to go, he grunted, trying to get up, but his leg wouldn't support him. From across the chasm, Valerius struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. He raised his sidearm, his face a mask of pure hatred. You will not escape me. Before he could fire, a new voice cut through the comms, cold, imperious, and filled with chilling authority. Commander Valerius, stand down. That is a direct order from Administrator Forlag. Valerius froze, his arm lowering instinctively. On the main view screen at the far end of the Nexus, an image flickered to life. It was the face of a man in his late 60s, with severe features, cold, calculating eyes, and the immaculate uniform of a Directorate Sector Administrator. This was the architect of it all. The asset is proving more valuable than we anticipated, Forlag said, his voice dripping with avarice. I want it captured, not pulverized. A fleet is en route to your position. The Vindicator and its battle group. We will take the asset and then proceed to its world of origin to acquire more samples, he smiled. A thin, cruel expression. We will not make the mistake of taking just one this time. The blood drained from Kale's face. A battle group. They couldn't fight a battle group. They couldn't even fight their way off this moon. Forlag wasn't just planning to recapture Anya. He was planning a full-scale invasion of her home, an act of genocide to secure a new resource. The stakes had just escalated from their own survival to the fate of an entire species. It was an unwinnable war. They were out of time, out of options, and out of hope. Anya helped Kale limp into a small, shielded access hub off the main nexus. The door sealed behind them, granting them a few precious moments of safety. Forlag's fleet was coming. The thought was a lead weight in Kale's stomach. They had seen what the Directorate did to worlds that stood in its way. He had seen it firsthand. He will destroy my people. Anya's thought was a whisper of despair. They do not understand war. Their consciousness is a song. His ships will bring only silence. Kale leaned against the wall, his shattered leg throbbing in time with the station's engines. He looked at her, at the immense power she held, and the profound sadness that seemed to be her constant companion. They could not win this fight. Not with force. Valerius's fanaticism was one thing. Administrator Forlag's cold, systematic greed, backed by a fleet of warships, was another. It was an extinction-level event in the making. There must be a way, he said, more to himself than to her. Something he's not expecting. Anya grew very still. The light within her dimmed, and she turned her gaze inward, as if searching the deepest recesses of her memory, of her very being. The silence in the small room stretched, thick and heavy. When she finally looked at him again, her stellar eyes were filled with a terrible, ancient knowledge. There is a way, she projected, her tones somber and final. A way to create a silence he cannot break. A peace he cannot shatter. She began to show him, pouring the knowledge directly into his mind. She showed him the chamber where she had been found, the heart of her world's resonant crystal network. It was a place of immense power, a focal point for the collective consciousness of her people. But it was more than that. It was a lock, a seal on an even older power. Her people were not just peaceful, they were guardians. They maintained a delicate balance, a great quiet, that resonated across their sector of space, a kind of psychic shield that calmed aggression and prevented conflict from taking root. It was this field the Directorate had unknowingly breached when they shattered the crystals and stole her away. She was the key to that lock. The ancient system could be reactivated, its field expanded exponentially to encompass the entire star system, perhaps even beyond. It would be a wave of absolute tranquility, a signal that would not destroy ships but would pacify the intent of those who crewed them. It would make war, on a fundamental level, impossible within its reach. Forlag's fleet would become a collection of aimless metal hulls, his soldiers suddenly unwilling and unable to follow orders of conquest. Then we have to do it, Kale said, a spark of hope igniting within him. We have to get you back to that chamber. I cannot, she replied, and he felt the immense weight of her sorrow. I am the key, but the lock has been changed. When they tore me from my home, the connection was damaged. The system now requires a new catalyst to bridge the gap. A translation. It needs a consciousness that understands both sides. A mind that knows violence and has chosen peace. A mind that can guide the energy through the wound they created. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. The terrible, impossible choice. It needs a human mind, Kale said, the words feeling like stones in his throat. Yes, she confirmed. To sit at the heart of the network, to become the new focal point. That mind would have to merge. It would become the anchor for the great quiet. It would spread its consciousness across the stars, a silent, eternal guardian. But its individual self, its memories, its body, they would be consumed. It would cease to be a person and become a presence. It was not a request. It was simply the truth. The only solution that existed. An act of ultimate, permanent sacrifice. One life to save billions. His life. He stood in the quiet of the access hub, the distant sounds of Valerius regrouping filtering through the door. His life. It wasn't much of a life, he thought. A collection of regrets, of orders followed and cynical compromises made. He had lived by a code of survival, a lonely, empty creed that had led him to this sterile moon, to this hopeless moment. He thought of the war, of the lies he had fought for. He thought of the system, the remorseless machine of Forlag and Valerius, a machine that would keep grinding worlds into dust unless it was stopped. He looked at Anya. She was the antithesis of that machine. She was life, harmony, a song the Directorate could never hope to understand. He had started this by offering a single, meaningless word of courtesy. Please, an act that had, against all odds, forged a connection. Now, he was being presented with the ultimate act of connection, of empathy. To give everything so that her people, and countless others, could live. His entire life had been a series of actions for which he was paid, or for which he was ordered. He fought for a paycheck, he guarded for a pension. This choice, this one final choice, would be the only one he ever made that was truly his own. To fight not for a contract or a flag, but for a cause. The internal debate was not a storm, but a quiet, settling calm. The soldier in him analyzed the odds, the strategic value. The outcome was clear. The tired man in him, the one who had seen too much and felt too little, simply weighed the emptiness of his future against the promise of a meaningful end. There was no real contest. To run, to hide, would be to condemn a whole species to extinction and allow Forlag to win. It would be the final, ultimate act of cowardice. To accept this fate, it was the first thing in a very long time that felt right. He pushed himself away from the wall, his decision made. He met her gaze, and the universe of sorrow in her eyes. He had no grand words, no heroic speech. His transformation from cynic to savior was a silent, internal process. All that was left was to communicate his acceptance. He reached out, not to her, but to the faint, sickly brand on her shoulder, the mark of the Directorate. He gently placed his fingers over it, a gesture of both comfort and understanding. Okay, he said, just that one word. Anya did not speak. He felt her response in his soul, a wave of profound, heartbreaking gratitude mingled with an equally profound sorrow. She raised her hand and touched the side of his face, her cool fingers a stark contrast to the feverish heat of his skin. A single, shimmering tear, like a drop of liquid starlight, traced a path down her cheek. She accepted his choice, not with joy, but with the solemn respect of one who understood the true cost. Their alliance was sealed. They had a plan. The chamber is not on my world, Anya's thought clarified, pulling him back to the grim reality of their situation. The Directorate survey team, in their ignorance, took a piece of it with them. A focusing crystal. They thought it was just a geological sample. It is here, in their deep storage research lab. That is where we must go. The final stand would not be on some distant, alien planet, but here, in the heart of the enemy's own fortress. They had to return to the upper levels, to the pristine, heavily guarded labs where their journey had begun. It was a suicide mission, but then, that was the entire point. Valerius had sealed the Nexus, but Anya's ability to unweave matter gave them a path. They moved through bulkheads and decks, bypassing security checkpoints and troop concentrations like ghosts in the machine. Kale's leg was a constant, grinding agony, but he pushed the pain down, fueled by adrenaline and a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man running for his life. He was a key turning in a lock, a final component moving into place. The deep storage lab was exactly as he remembered it from his orientation tour years ago, cold, sterile, and silent. Rows upon rows of stasis pods and containment fields held the Directorate's secrets, failed experiments, alien artifacts, biological samples from 100 conquered worlds. In the center of the main chamber, on a raised dais, sat the crystal. It was a shard of translucent, faintly glowing rock about the size of a man's chest, its facets catching the cold light of the lab. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy, a captured heartbeat. This is the place, Kale said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. As they approached the dais, alarms blared to life. The entire room was bathed in crimson emergency lighting. On all sides, heavy blast doors slammed shut, sealing them in. From a concealed speaker, Administrator Forlag's voice filled the room, smooth and triumphant. Did you really think I would not anticipate this, Kale? The asset's energy signature has been drawn to this artifact since it arrived. It was the most obvious trap in the world. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing squads of Directorate heavy troopers, their armor black and menacing. They were armed not with pulse rifles, but with sonic disruptors and stasis cannons, weapons designed specifically to subdue a creature like Anya. At their head stood Commander Valerius, his face grimly satisfied, a fresh scar on his cheek from their last encounter. "It is over, traitor," Valerius said, his voice flat. "You have nowhere left to run." This was it. The final confrontation. Kale looked at Anya. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet resolve that mirrored his own. She nodded to him, a silent signal. "It is time." He limped toward the crystal, ignoring the weapons aimed at him. "You don't understand what you're doing, Forlag," he called out to the unseen administrator. "This is more than just a resource. It's the key to peace." "Peace is a commodity, Kale," Forlag's voice replied, laced with amusement. "And I prefer to be the sole supplier. Commander, take the asset. Kill the man." Valerius gave the order to fire. As the troopers raised their weapons, Anya acted. She slammed her palms together, and a shockwave of force rippled outwards, not of destruction, but of pure inertia. The troopers were frozen in place, their armor locking up, their weapons falling from suddenly paralyzed hands. It was a move that cost her. Kale felt the immense drain it took, a desperate, all-or-nothing gambit to buy him the seconds he needed. He reached the dais and placed his hands on the cool surface of the crystal. The moment his skin made contact, a torrent of energy surged into him. His mind exploded. He saw the universe not as a collection of stars and planets, but as a symphony of interconnected energy, a web of life and consciousness. He felt Anya's people, a song of sorrow and fear. He felt the cold, jagged discord of Forlag's fleet, a hunger that consumed everything it touched. The process began. It was not a glorious ascension. It was agony. His body felt like it was being unraveled, his atoms stripped away and rewoven into the crystalline lattice. His memories flashed before him. The mud of Viridia, the chrome hallways of the outpost, the quiet moment of understanding in the dusty storage room. Each memory was a thread, and each thread was being pulled from the tapestry of his identity, offered up to the greater whole. He screamed, a raw, soundless cry that echoed in the minds of everyone in the room. Valerius, shaking off the last of the inertial field, watched in horror and confusion. "What is he doing?" he stammered. Anya stood guard before the dais, her body glowing with a fierce, protective light, holding back the few troopers who had managed to recover. She was his shield, his final guardian, ensuring he had the time to finish what he had started. Kale let go. He released his grip on his name, his past, his pain. He gave himself over to the energy, not fighting it, but guiding it. He became the bridge. His consciousness flowed out of his dissolving body, through the crystal, across the void of space. He reached out to the network on Anya's homeworld, a vast, sleeping mind. He took the jagged, violent thoughts of humanity, the concepts of war, greed, and dominance, and he translated them into a form the Great Quiet could understand, a wound it could heal. He became the sacrifice that made peace possible. As the last vestiges of his physical form sublimated into pure light, a wave of energy pulsed outward from the crystal. It was not sound or light, but something else entirely. A feeling, a concept. It washed over the lab, and the troopers lowered their weapons, not out of compliance, but out of a sudden, profound lack of will to cause harm. Valerius stared at his hands, a look of utter bewilderment on his face, the hatred that had driven him for so long simply gone. On the bridge of the flagship Vindicator, light years away, Administrator Forlag watched his tactical display in disbelief. His fleet, poised to begin its orbital bombardment, had simply stopped. Weapons systems went offline, not because of a malfunction, but because the officers manning them refused the orders. A strange, inexplicable peace had descended upon his crews. The drive for conquest, the aggression that was the very engine of his power, had evaporated. His war was over before it had even begun. He was a tyrant with no one left willing to enforce his tyranny. The Great Quiet had returned. 10 years passed. The Directorate, deprived of its primary tool of expansion and control, aggression, crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. A new coalition of worlds rose from its ashes, founded not on dominance, but on cooperation. The truth of the Outer Rim Purge and the crimes of Administrator Forlag became public knowledge, a harsh lesson learned. Humanity, humbled and changed, made its first formal, peaceful contact with Anya's people, the crystalline singers of the Veiled Nebula. An era of unprecedented peace began to dawn across the known galaxy. On Hyperion's sixth moon, Outpost 7 was decommissioned, its halls silent and empty. But the deep storage lab had been transformed. It was now a sanctuary, a protected place of pilgrimage. The room was open to the void, the ceiling having been removed to reveal the star-dusted tapestry of space. In the center of the chamber, the crystal pulsed with a soft, steady, golden light. It was warm to the touch. Anya stood before it. She was no longer a prisoner, but a guardian and an ambassador for her people. She came here often, to this quiet place that was both a tomb and a cradle. She reached out and placed her hand on the crystal's surface. She did not hear a voice or see a face, but she felt him, a vast, calm, and eternal presence, a silent consciousness that touched every corner of the system, a gentle pressure that soothed anxieties and quieted violent thoughts. He was the anchor of the great quiet. He was the peace they all now enjoyed. He was no longer Kale, the jaded soldier. He was something infinitely more. He was remembered not as a hero in a grand battle, but as a quiet man who had made a choice. His sacrifice was not a celebrated, bloody victory, but a silent, profound act of becoming. A single word of kindness had started a revolution, and a single act of selflessness had saved a galaxy. His legacy was written in the enduring, somber peace of the stars, a silent guardian watching over a universe he had given everything to protect.